Next up, we have Omkar with his presentation on contextual tip.
Hi, I'm Omkar. I'm a front-end intern on the Quantum Bar team. That's the team that works on the address bar for Firefox. Drew is my mentor, and Mike DeBoer is my manager. So my project was to create a new JavaScript API for web extensions. Before I talk more about that, I want to give you guys some background on that. So web extensions are a piece of software you can add to a browser, like ad blockers like uBlock Origin or Facebook Container by default. And they're built with the same web technologies used to build web pages or much of the front end for Firefox, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So before Firefox 57, web extensions could do pretty much anything they wanted. They had access to all the internals of Firefox, and that's incredibly powerful. You can build or find extensions that do just what you need, but it's also dangerous for the same reasons from a security perspective, because the web extensions could steal your passwords or do a lot of malicious things. So starting with Firefox 57, we limited web extensions, what they could do to a specific set of APIs. And these APIs define what web extension can do, what part of the browser they can interact with, and how they can interact with it. So an example of that is like the theme API that lets you change the look and feel of Firefox, but you can only change the colors of certain elements, and you can't do much more than that. So if you want to do something with the browser using web extension, there needs to be an API for it. And if you want to expand the capabilities of web extensions, you need to create new web extension APIs. So my project was to create a new web extension API for web extensions to be able to add a contextual tip right below the URL bar. And a contextual tip is an icon, some text, and a button right in the URL bar's pop-up panel, so it can appear with the search suggestions as you type. And the motivation for this, the reason why we're creating a API for web extensions is we noticed that a lot of users, the UX team noticed that a lot of users, when they want to do a search, they'll open a new tab to google.com or bing.com, and they'll do their search there. And we want to let these users know that they can do their searches in the address bar itself. So we want to build a web extension. And the reason why I want to build this as a web extension is because we want to roll this out as an experiment to a small percentage of our users before we consider making this a part of Firefox. So we want to see if it will actually influence the way people search. And if we can get more people to use the address bar for their searches, we'll also make more money. And there's a little more to the search tips extension than that. It is currently a work in progress, but some things we need to consider are whether there are any notifications being shown, whether they recently updated Firefox, how many times the tip been shown, and more. Another example use case is the search interventions web extension, which Harry, a member of the Quantum Bar team, is working on. It would use the contextual tip API to show a tip to help surface features or functionalities within Firefox. So if someone looked up, how do I clear my cookies in Firefox, you could use the contextual tip API to show a tip to clear the cookies. This is not part of my project. This is just an example use case for the contextual tip API. So some of the challenges with making the API involve becoming familiar with the code base. This is the largest code base I've ever worked with. It's the first time where I've had to search for files because I couldn't find the files in the right folders. And implementing some parts was also challenging. Sometimes writing tests was harder than implementing a feature itself. So like implementing icon support, the contextual tip API supports developers specifying what icons to use for default light and dark themes, as well as icons for low and high resolution screens. And figuring out how to write the test for that was harder than actually implementing support for that. The biggest challenge was probably that the API was always changing as we were implementing it, because we would find some edge cases that we hadn't anticipated, or some scenarios where there was undefined behavior. So we would go back and change the API design, or we would just have like new ideas that was just an improvement upon what we already had. And when we're making this API, we want to make it so that it's as easy as possible for developers to use the API. There shouldn't be anything unexpected. It should be intuitive. They shouldn't have to refer to documentation to use the API, ideally. And we want to make it easy for developers to build good experiences and make it hard to build bad experiences for Firefox users. So we started off basing the API off of an existing API, and we started off with a lot of stuff and then we started simplifying some of what we had over time. And we used to support setting contextual tip on specific windows or all windows. So if a developer or someone making web extension made a call to the set function and they omitted the window ID, then we would set a contextual tip for all of the existing windows and also if the user opened a new window. Or if they specified a window ID, we would only show a contextual tip for that window. But as we were testing out the API, we realized that we just don't have a use case for that. So we removed it, and now every time you make a call to set, we'll just make the contextual tip appear on the user's topmost, most recent window. We used to have defaults in the manifest, and what those were is the developer could specify the text, the icon, and the links, or the button text and the link text in the web extensions manifest, which is like the file that contains some of the metadata for the extension, like the title of the web extension, the 1.0 or 2.0 version of the web extension. And we used to have this so that the developer would not, if the developer specified the contextual tips details in the manifest, they wouldn't have to programmatically set the contextual tip. But we got rid of that too because they can just use a set function. So this is what the API looks like finally. We have two functions for setting and removing, and then events for specifying what happens when a button or link is clicked. So some of the next steps include finishing the search tips experiment and also finishing some parts of the API. We want to consider making the contextual tip API public because right now the API is only available to web extensions signed by Mozilla. So I learned a lot about JavaScript, the event loop, this, learned about how web extensions work in the process of developing an API, got better at debugging and just writing cleaner code. I want to thank my mentor. He's been super helpful throughout the summer. He's helped me out with pretty much every issue that I've had. Halfway through the summer, I was talking to my manager, Mike, that it's really helpful having a mentor in person. And Mike told me that Drew doesn't come into the office, but this summer, instead of working remotely from home, he came to the office almost every single day to be my mentor. That's something that I really appreciate. So thank you, Drew. And I want to thank Mike, my manager, for being my manager and for our one-on-ones. Shane for reviewing the web extension code and providing feedback on the API's design. Verdi for providing the mock-ups for the contextual tip. Marco for helping me out with technical issues while I was at Whistler. Dow and Tim for helping me out with CSS-related issues. The university team for extending an offer and for the opportunity to work on Firefox. And then the interns and all the Mozillians I've met who've helped shape the summer. Really happy I met all of you. You guys are a really open, friendly bunch of people. Yeah, I'm going to miss all of you, but I'm really happy that I got to meet you guys. And if you have any questions, I can take those now, or you can Slack me.
I have a question. So for the experiment for the quantum bar, are you familiar with the design of the experiment? What's going to be shown in the contextual tip?
Are you asking about the search tips experiment?
Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
What kind of context is going to be shown in the quantum bar when the experiments run with this new API?
Yeah, so the idea is that if a user visits their default search engine's webpage, and the tip would say something along the lines of type less, or it's like type less, search with Google, or just something letting them know that they can use the address bar to do searches. Does that answer your question?
And it's just like a line right under the search bar?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a one-line piece of text. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, so I don't know if this was specifically what you worked on, but how do you actually match the search query with the action? Is it like regex or machine learning?
Oh, so that's separate. That was out of the scope of this project.
Okay.
That's part of the search interventions web extension,
Okay.
and that's something Harry is working on. So you could talk to Harry Twyford about that.
Okay, cool.
I know you mentioned one of the challenges is writing tests. So there's some edge cases and undefined behaviors. Can you give some examples of those?
Um, there are definitely some cases. So if like one thing that was a concern was there was a I think I have an example somewhere here, but sorry, this is a bunch of slides that I deleted. Oh, I can't find it, but there was I used to have some slide where so before in the beginning of the API, we used to have individual functions for setting the text, the button text, and link text. But the problem with that is you could end up in a scenario. You could end up with a scenario where a contextual tip is shown without any text, and it just kind of looks like a bug from the user's perspective, because you see an icon and a button. So that's something that I guess would be like unexpected from the user's perspective. And then for I guess undefined behavior, one question that came up is if when we used to support setting contextual tip on multiple windows, if a developer adds an event listener to all the windows, and then they set a contextual tip on a specific window, on like a new window, do we add that event listener to that contextual tip? Like what would a developer expect in that scenario? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening.